So let's just get started. What your thoughts on last night's State of the Union?
Well, other than, a couple of statements like, freedom will never be defeated by tyranny, and we shouldn't defund the police, which was a real about face for this president. I was disappointed, quite frankly, because his rhetoric does not match his actions and his leadership. And so I, quite frankly, found it to be more of a speech from a politician than a leader. And I found it disconnected from reality as much as his policies have been disconnected from the real needs of the American people. I mean, he said, for example, that in order to advance liberty, we need to secure the border. I mean, that's laughable if it weren't such a serious issue. He has been derelict in doing anything but abandoning border states and border communities and completely abdicating his chief responsibility to provide for the security of the American people. And his open border policies have been devastating to this country. So he's talked about making things in America and leading the world in manufacturing. And at the same time, he's raising taxes, which are driving our jobs overseas and making us less competitive around the globe. He bragged about calling on and drawing down the world oil reserve to stabilize things in Europe right now. At the same time, he has been assaulting oil and gas repeatedly, canceling the XL pipeline, canceling drilling, and just putting just all the regulatory activism that has made the cost for consumers go up and have really compromised our energy independence. And when you look across the pond into the Eastern Europe theater now, with Russia's invading of Ukraine, you have to appreciate how important energy is as a geopolitical weapon. And that weapon is in the hands, unfortunately, of Vladimir Putin. And we will unilaterally surrender that weapon if we continue down this road of the Green New Deal and these extreme climate policies. So I was not close to impressed. I thought at best it was empty rhetoric, and at worst it was intellectually dishonest.
I want to go back to talk about the border security and the border state. And of course, you've been vocal about the immigration planes that are flying into Abilene's airport, and those are still happening. I think we had a one about 2 weeks ago. Anything that you've heard or any communication you've had about that?
We continue to sign more people up on our legislation that would prevent that from happening. That is, there would be deference to governors in consultation with local leaders as to whether they wanted to receive the caught and released illegal immigrants in their communities and their states. I can tell you, as you know, Texas and West Texas has no interest in being complicit in this lawlessness and being a sanctuary state. And so that would, if our legislation passed, this would change. I don't suspect it will. We're in the minority still, and we don't have a single Democrat that would sign up for this bill or is interested in stopping the chaos at the border. But yes, people are still getting off planes in droves, being detained for a short while, only to be released into our communities. And this is happening all across the United States. And so the picture of what's happening in the big country is unfortunately consistent with other communities from coast to coast. And the folks are COVID positive in some cases, have a criminal record in some cases. And in many cases, we don't know because they don't check and they don't do that due diligence, and they jeopardize the safety of our citizens as a result. So I don't see any change in the posture of this administration. And we've already had 2.5 million people that we've apprehended cross the border illegally. We've had 134% increase in fentanyl seizures, which, by the way, the amount we've captured last year would kill Americans, every single American, 7 times over. And then we have the other criminal elements that continue to threaten the security of the United States and our communities in West Texas.
Now talking about Europe, Asia, Russia and the Ukraine. Talk to me about, your stance on what we should be doing. And of course, Dyess Air Force Base right here is, America's, lift and strike base. And so they could play a pretty pivotal role.
Well, I think that as the largest B-1 bomber base and the lead dog in the sled of the global strike force, I would tell you that Dyess and the airmen at Dyess already play a critical part in our air arsenal and our deterrence. Now, the President Vladimir Putin, the tyrant, understands, because he is one of the few countries that has long-range strike capability. He knows what the B-1 is capable of. And so that is to contain Putin in the confines of Ukraine and not to go outside to NATO member nations is going to be really important to staving off a world war. And so the B-1 and the airmen at Dyess are playing an integral role. They are not engaged in conflict, but they are always, as long as they can fly and combat ready, are part of our deterrence. And if we get the B-21 sooner rather than later, and we're on track, but this just highlights the importance of having what would be the most capable, most lethal long-range strike plane in the world. So we have to accelerate the development and get that plane in the air, because the adversaries are emboldened today. I think what's happened here, Travis, is that our adversaries have watched this administration fumble and fail in the withdrawal of Afghanistan. I think they smell weakness all across the world, and weakness invites aggression. I mean, if you think about it, Crimea was taken under the Obama administration. Then we had 4 years of a president that believed in peace through strength, and nothing happened. You didn't hear a peep out of Vladimir Putin. And then as soon as President Biden becomes our commander in chief, and we have the debacle that was the Afghanistan withdrawal, he is in full force executing his invasion against the free and democratic people of Ukraine. He was hesitant, he was slow to respond, and he was weak. And had he taken preemptive actions to implement the sanctions that are now being ratcheted up on the front end, we may not see the slaughter that's going on in Ukraine. But now Putin's in, and he is a man with a great ego, and he will want to save face, and he will not leave until he has decimated that country and brought it to its knees, at least its leaders to its knees. So we're in a bad spot because of that hesitance and that failure to project strength and failure to act early. We still have to provide lethal aid. We still have to coalesce with the democratic nations in Europe and NATO member nations. That's happening. That's a good thing. The sanctions are being, I think, felt in a much bigger way now in Russia, among the Russian people, because of the tightening of their economy on account of the financial system and energy sector sanctions. But there's still some loopholes, some relief valves that we need to shut. But it's unfortunate. It is a story of too little, too late. But it is also an inspiration to see the people of Ukraine fighting with every fiber of their being to maintain their freedom and independence. And tell you, it's a real eye-opening lesson for many younger Americans that haven't ever experienced war, or known anybody that's seen the horrors of war. Well, these folks in Ukraine are willing to put it all on the line for their freedom and their country and their fellow countrymen's security.
Finally, I want to ask you, what do you wish you would have heard last night in President Biden's speech?
Oh, there were a number of things I wish I would have heard, but let me start with, I wish I would see the strength and the urgency that sometimes I hear in his rhetoric, but are completely disconnected. I do wish I would have heard that he was going to give up on this radical climate agenda that is undermining our energy independence and making us more vulnerable to the likes of Russia, and that make it more difficult to supply energy to our allies like Germany and others in Europe, so that they don't have to be dependent on Russia. And Russia has a big weapon as a result. I wish the president would stop popping off about and making political statements about we must secure the border to advance freedom. That's BS. And the people of Texas, and I would say most of Americans, understand that there has been zero commitment. In fact, his policies are directly the result of, or has directly resulted in the chaos and the disaster at the border. And that's not just drugs and crime and illegal immigrants and the cost to our society. It's the human trafficking toll, the humanitarian crisis, all of that he's complicit in, and he didn't acknowledge it. He didn't say that he was going to pivot. He literally said a few things about Ukraine that we could all agree and appreciate and stand in and support as a unified country on behalf of the free people of Ukraine. And then he quickly defaulted to his tired old plans that have failed. Socialist policies like the tax hikes and more spending that's driving inflation, which is the tax on every American right now, and then the Green New Deal, which is just a complete disaster. So there were a lot of things that I wish he would have said differently, but what I pray for the sake of our country, and especially for the security and safety of our fellow Texans, is that he would actually not just change his rhetoric, but change his behavior and actually execute on the first priority of the government, which is the safety and security of its citizens.
All right, very good. That's all I have, sir. Anything else? Travis,
thank you. Always good to be with you. I appreciate the opportunity, and congratulations, well deserved. And don't be that stuffy corporate guy that's too big to talk to the little people. Okay.